My name is Fintan Ryan. I'm an industry analyst with a firm called RedMonk. For those of you that don't know RedMonk, we call ourselves the industry analyst firm for developers. We spend our time talking with the practitioners and actually with people who are doing things, and the entire premise of what we look at is around communities and adoption and how developers and operations people are changing the buying cycles and purchasing cycles in technology. But I'm here today to talk about community and to talk about what community means and what community in terms of Kubernetes means. It's kind of useful at times to revisit what do we actually mean by community. This is the definition that Google has when you stick community into Google. And the main parts that always stand out to me is about having interests in common and having kind of certain attitudes and understanding sharing and things like that. And we do that in a lot of ways. We do it in person, we do it on mailing lists, we do it in various places, but by nature we tend as an industry to be somewhat introverted, which brings us to conversation. And how we have conversations is a very, very important thing, and it's what builds actual communities. So one of the things, as I just said there, we're introverted as an industry. So what I'd like to ask people to do is take a look around this room. I think there's people here who don't know each other. So find someone that you don't know, all right? And say hello. And I want just say hello and talk to each other for a minute.
Just double check.
I know majority of people. Nice to meet you.
I'm Sarah. Good to meet you.
I know majority of people here. It's like we're building community.
Joe.
Monday.
And Sarah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I do know you.
So did I. I remember you. Ages ago.
Okay.
Red card.
Right, come along. All right, so the whole idea of that is just basically say hello to someone you don't know, start talking to them, try to understand who they are, and maybe you'll have a conversation with them later on. On to the actual community. So you kind of wonder about how vibrant communities can be. And if you look at Kubernetes at the moment, it is vibrant. There's a lot of stuff happening around the space. This is Borough Market in London on a Saturday. If you haven't been to Borough Market and you're around tomorrow, it's worth a wander in. It is completely and utterly chaotic, very overpriced food, but it's a lot of fun. And you can actually get, as a slight oddity, you can get some really good English sparkling wines, and there are actually good English sparkling wines. You can get them in Borough Market. I think it's actually the opposite side of this picture. I should have found a picture with the place I like in it. The vibrancy and the importance of what's happening in communities and the velocity of communities is very, very important. One of the ways that we measure this, quite obviously, is with GitHub. So if we take a look at what's happening in terms of who's committing and where code is being contributed into Kubernetes, and you start looking at, okay, who are the companies that are actually committing, you start seeing, obviously, that Google are by far the biggest committer into this. By far. Someone gave me a stat earlier on that when Kubernetes was launched, and the project was launched, that there was probably more engineers working internally in Google on Kubernetes than was working in the entirety of Docker. So there's a lot of work that's happening and a lot of things that are going on there. It's also interesting to kind of take a look at what companies are actually making significant bets on using Kubernetes, and also what organizations are looking at. The one that really sticks out to me is CERN. I found it really interesting that they're looking at stuff around Kubernetes. And there's a question about the diversity of where code is actually coming from. And I think this is actually an important one to understand. Okay, I'm going to give this with a little bit of a proviso to start before I start running through these numbers. These are actually relatively good when it comes to how projects are laid out. So of the open source projects we observe, about 84% of the commits that are going into Kubernetes come from people who've done 100 plus commits. So that's quite a small subset of the actual overall audience of people that are there. 95% of the commits come from people who've done more than 10 commits. So it's quite a dense population that's doing all of that stuff. And 86% of the commits are coming from the top 10 companies who are contributing to Kubernetes. Now, what's interesting in that one is that percentage is actually dropping down. There are more community contributions coming in. When I ran these numbers initially in August of last year, it was closer to 90%. So it's a gradual decline. What we tend to note when we start looking and analyzing who's actually contributing to projects is about 70 to 80% tends to be where you end up with a thing of there's a company that is very focused around the project or doing a lot of the commits, and then there are other parts of the community. So this is heading towards the 80% mark. The other one that's kind of interesting to look at is who's logging issues. Now, I'm going to put a proviso on the stats here. I looked at this morning and went, something doesn't quite add up here. So I think what I've pulled is actually bugs that have been closed as duplicates as well. So there may be some things that are a bit messier, but it's the same kind of distribution. It's the same major companies that are doing all of the contributions. But there is a much, much higher level of diversity in terms of who's logging issues and who's basically looking at Kubernetes and looking at things that are wrong and trying to highlight it to the community. And in this case, the key stat is that 75% of the issues are coming from the top 10 companies, which is 25% are coming from outside. Again, when I looked at this back in August, this was about 83, 84%. So again, it's showing adoption. It's showing people who are actually looking at Kubernetes from outside of the community, then coming into it, and new companies that are starting to use it. But the thing about all of this stuff is all of this is around GitHub. And this is data that we're looking at around GitHub. And this is a problem. This is a really big problem because it doesn't acknowledge where other parts of the community are. So one of the things that kind of got my mind, this is straight from the community website. It's our developers, view contributors, it brings you to GitHub, and it brings you to contributions. And that's what we're defining as a contribution. That's really not, there's really a lot more to open source communities and to the Kubernetes community as well than just who's the developers. And I refer to this as the tyranny of the GitHub green. My GitHub stats stopped probably somewhere over there at the moment because I stopped working in a company that was doing an open source project, and I moved to work in an analyst firm where I do hand wavy stuff instead. But we have an obsession around measuring what is very, very easy to measure, which is the contribution part, these code contribution parts, and not looking at other things. Now, this is kind of best summed up to me last year by Kelsey Hightower, and Kelsey may be popping in afterwards, but he made this point that we don't look at what's happening around the actual code projects. We don't look at documentation properly. We don't look at the things that people are doing in terms of teaching, in terms of sharing knowledge, and all of those kind of areas. Now, there was some interesting, the actual thread around that tweet is actually really interesting to read because people pointed out around the BSD community, there's a really big focus around documentation and making it a very, very important subset of what's happening. There's also other communities where there's a lot of sharing and learning. The upside is there is a lot of sharing and learning happening around the Kubernetes community as well. And this is where we're seeing the sharing and learning, and it's outside of that small cadre of initial committers. This is meetups around the world that have associated themselves in some way with Kubernetes. Quite a few of them are actual direct Kubernetes meetups, but there's a number of kind of other technologies. So there's like CoreOS meetups, and there's cloud native meetups, and all sorts of things that are all talking about Kubernetes. But you start seeing this kind of distribution of where things are happening. So infrastructure software-wise, we have a lot of people here in San Francisco, we have a lot of people here in London, so we have this big burst of stuff that's happening in terms of a big community that's growing. But you start looking at all these other areas where people are going out and they're actually sharing knowledge with each other, and they're actually these are communities that are organizing themselves and that are having the conversation about Kubernetes. And this kind of stuff never gets picked up in Git. You're not going to see it.
Pulling that from meetup.com?
Yeah, pulling it from meetup.com and doing an awful lot of munging to make the data usable. But yeah, it all comes from Meetup. I'm happy to publish the raw stats that I am, the aggregated stats afterwards for it. There's the overall growth of what these meetups are, and the one that we plot a lot is GitHub stars, and we take a look at, okay, what's happening in terms of the stars growth. But what's been interesting is to look at the growth in the meetups, and it's a pretty steep curve that we're seeing in terms of in under a year, the amount of people that have gotten interested and are looking at stuff around Kubernetes and are looking at things around the cloud-native world. It's quite an unusual and interesting way of thinking about all of this stuff. The other one that's kind of interesting is to look at what's happening on Stack Overflow. It's where, well, I did see a really good tweet the other day where someone had the programming is now cutting and pasting from Stack Overflow, and it was an O'Reilly book cover made up out of it, which is quite funny. But this is questions that are being asked about Kubernetes on Stack Overflow and where people in the community are trying to answer things. What I did like was seeing this dip here, because it does prove that people actually take some time off around Christmas, which is a refreshing thing to see. But the other part around all this stuff is how people are sharing and talking about stuff. LinkedIn have a wonderfully restrictive API, and you can pull basically no data whatsoever from it. And they own SlideShare, so I can pull hardly any data from SlideShare, and that I can actually use. But there's over 1,000 presentations about Kubernetes on SlideShare that have appeared in under a year. It's not just vendors. As having worked in a vendor company, we will recycle the presentation. We're not going to keep doing things. This is an awful lot of other people that are looking about stuff. Now, with that, I could stand here and talk for another 25 minutes, 30 minutes, which would be really, really boring for everyone, because all I'll do is I'll just keep popping off different stats. So if you look around, you'll see these little red cards that are there. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the red cards and what they are. So first off, many people here have been to an on-conference or cloud camp or something similar. Okay, so a few of you know exactly what's going on here. So keep your mouth shut for a moment. And for the other folks, how many people here have done direct code contributions to Kubernetes? We will pick you. Okay. How many people here have given an internal presentation in an organization about Kubernetes and talked about what they're doing? Okay, so we have quite a few people. Yourself. And let's see, we'll go for one other type of person. How many people here? I was going to say organize meetups, but I know that's going to be me lot. He does as well. Okay, so we'll pull you as well. So can I get the three of you guys to come up here, and I'll explain what's about to happen.
Can I ask a quick question on the stat here?
Yep.
So how many views of those presentations on SlideShare?
I wasn't able to pull the stats properly on it to correlate it, but it's about 40 to 50 per presentation. It's not massive, but there's a bit.
Can I ask another question?
Yep.
On your slide about contributions, the very first graph,
Yep.
did you pull out any automated stuff? So like if someone's using an automated test routine?
Yeah, I pulled out, so the automated, there's an automated committer and an automated QA thing. I removed those from the stats. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
The merge commits don't count.
Yeah, they've been removed. Okay. So let me explain why these poor three misfortunate gentlemen have arrived up here. The idea behind an on-conference is that we don't have an agenda. We just start asking questions, and the people here are our initial panel and start asking things. If you disagree with what they're saying, you are welcome to red card them. The trade-off of that is you've got to get up and take part in the panel instead. Okay? The whole idea is just to try create a conversation and do things. And I know there are a couple of people here that are quite opinionated about stuff, so we should definitely get one or two opinions. And if you're feeling really shy, don't worry about it. We'll edit you out of the video afterwards. Okay. So with that, I'm going to ask for a question from the audience. Who think of a question that you want to ask about communities?
So for your meetups, who's your target audience? Are you targeting developers or are you targeting ops?
Good. Mic is off.
I go first?
Yeah.
Sure. So just to define, I'm the guy who makes presentation internally, and I'm a product guy. So in our company, we do some products based on Kubernetes. So indefinitely, we organize meetups and we invite people. So that was a very appropriate question, I would say. And it's not easy to answer, unfortunately, because the line between the two is almost doesn't exist anymore, luckily. But if you work with Kubernetes, it's easier to get dev people excited about it than ops. So that would be our primary target. And ops are more skeptic, usually. And before they they start getting close to technologies like Kubernetes, it takes longer to convince them.
Introduce yourself. So first time.
Sure. So yeah, so my name is Marco. I work for Flexient. We do orchestration all over the place. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Ben. I created Katacoda. We're an interactive learning platform for software engineers. I also run the Docker London meetup. So it's an interesting question, which I don't target people. Like, Docker London is very, turns up. That's more developer focused is what we're finding. Developers wanting to get started and kind of figure out what the community is looking like and what people are saying and how to begin. But we also have quite a diverse group. So we have, and that then comes down to the speakers. So we had the Docker and unikernels on Monday, and that brought out a lot more advanced users than what we'd normally see. But generally, yeah, it's developer mindsets and developer audiences.
Hey, I'm Sean Ludwig from Apprenda, as an enterprise platform as a service. And to be perfectly honest, we're relatively new to this, and we just created a new container orchestration community in New York City, and we haven't even had our first meetup. But the excitement and the amount of people that have flocked to it have been pretty substantial, and we already are at our cap for the meetup. And I think we're not really sure exactly what it is yet. We know that New York City is, I think, kind of underserved when it comes to fantastic technology meetups. I honestly think there's room for more. And we're going to see what the community looks like. And if we feel like we're targeting the wrong people, and we want to encourage developers, DevOps, anyone to come that's going to be making real community contributions. And we're going to be doing that as well. And we hope to learn from them. We hope to, kind of exchange a lot of good ideas.
You are also allowed, so on the other one, if any of you guys want to sit down all of a sudden, you're allowed to do it as well. So don't worry about it. Someone else would like to jump in. So it's not, so rules. We'll see what the next question is. It is an uncomplicated next question. So, another question related to community.
I mean, obviously, Google is dominant right now with Kubernetes. Is that a plus or a minus in your mind?
I'll just say it's a plus. I mean, I think that they've got incredible experience. So having them as, one of them, obviously the most prominent contributor seems like a pretty good thing. So just in terms of we're looking at it from an enterprise perspective, having Google as being a big part of it, it's fantastic.
Do you want to follow up?
I'd like to answer that as well. It's interesting because we're from the same company and have a little bit different opinions as well. So in this particular case, I think that it can be a plus just because of, I guess, what seems of Google intentions with the project, and so I think it's great. I think it can be dangerous in other sorts of projects when there is one very clear committer that could be driving the direction of the project to their own benefit, and so it's certainly something that that would be nice to see a bigger distribution in other things. But specifically around Kubernetes, the nice thing is that Google's intention, at least as many people understand, is that there's no clear path for them to make a commercial product out of it, that they want to really guide that direction more than for internal consumption or stuff like that. And so I think that in that case, the years of experience that we get from them contributing so much is fantastic.
Can I red card people in the audience? Is that how it works? So back in the day, I worked at Rackspace when they brought OpenStack to the market, and I see a lot of similarities here. Just because you've got a large enterprise trying to bring a piece of open source software out there, Rackspace got a lot of heat don't think people trusted them to own that piece of IP and take it forward as a group. So I think at some point Kubernetes needs to look at whether they're going to become an out-and-out foundation, but they must learn from all the mistakes that Rackspace made when they foundationized OpenStack, and they kind of stepped back too far. They lost that position of ownership, and the whole thing went a little bit crazy.
So on that, there's the Cloud Native Foundation, CNCF, is addressing it. Oh, sorry. Sorry. On that, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation has just had Kubernetes promoted as its first project. So. Okay.
I'll do you. You spoke. Do you answer this question?
Whatever you want, man.
So I'm Gareth Rushgrove, I'm from Puppet Labs. I'm partly recording just to act as a counterpoint rather than necessarily anything else. Arguing is good. I think one of the potential downsides of having a single and specifically Google as the entity is that the software design can be based around, is going to prioritize problems of an organization that looks like Google. And when it comes to very large organizations, enterprise organizations, are they going to look like Google in, let's be silly, in 20 years, like 15 years in the future? Are they all going to have as many software engineers as Google? Are they going to have the same organizational structure? Are they going to have the same sort of resources and everything else? And will the software work for both those use cases? So, I'm gone.
You're gone. Gareth is gone. So I'm Diane Mueller. I'm the community manager for Openshift, the Red Hat platform as a service. And if you looked at the distribution there, you could see that Red Hat was there in second place, and then CoreOS and Meteor CoreOS. And Kismatic has an enterprise Kubernetes thing. So I think there's already in the Kubernetes community an outlook that is talking to and making sure the use cases are there for enterprise use in private distributions of Kubernetes. So I think there is some balance. The CNCF, what I'm hoping going forward, will maintain that balance. So that's what I think. It's been pretty healthy so far, but we'll see how it goes as we get further down that path.
So trying to find speakers for Docker London is an interesting task. And I was trying to reach out to more people to widen it, not just be Docker and Swarm and blah. So went to Kubernetes. And people were a little bit nervous. And it's like, Kubernetes talks aren't really a Docker London responsibility. It shouldn't, it didn't fit within that community, which I don't know if that's because it's a Google Docker big thing and it's not a community thing. But from my point of view, it should sit alongside the rest of the Docker talks and other things. And I don't know if that was a side effect, but it's a concern because people should know what Kubernetes is and they should be exposed to it, even if it is at a Docker hosted event. So,
any red card? No. So I think it's a big plus to have Google, and that's because when talking to customers, I see that it's as somebody else said already. Having Google backing this project is really comforting and say, okay, I can trust it. It's not going to go away anytime soon, and that's not true for many other open source projects nowadays. Going back. Right.
You can't trust Google to not canon projects.
Yeah.
I don't actually.
Come on.
What's happened here? I'm the only one. So I'm going to use this opportunity to plug the next talk, which I'm giving. Ilya, you've got to come and join me. I can't be the only person up here. Yeah, and this is also the company that Fintan used to work for, by the way. So this is completely an ambush. Yeah.
Or actually, can I make a counterpoint about the Google thing? Okay, this is the part where I potentially risk my job. No, because I actually... Oh, yes, thank you. I'm Sarah Novotny. I've introduced myself a number of times today. I am a program manager for Kubernetes at Google. We hear both sides of this, that it's very good that Google's behind it and has good infrastructure and has long history with this. And, oh my gosh, it's Google, you might kill the project. You know, we have a whole list. Here's the Wikipedia page of dead projects. We've gotten a lot of both of those. And it's very much a fair point on both those counts. And that's one of the very big reasons behind putting it in the Cloud Native Compute Foundation and building that foundation, not as the Kubernetes Foundation, but as the big tent that should include the broader Cloud Native future. I had one more point, but ask more questions.
I just wanted to add to that Google might kill it. I think the CNCF is excellent, and I definitely think that's a good move. I think another point with Google being so keen on Kubernetes is it suffers quite a lot from like third system syndrome of being incredibly complicated. And I think knowing the guys that wrote Omega, you know, which was the second system syndrome, yeah, I think Kubernetes suffers a little bit from that. And I think there are simpler, easier to use products that maybe fit better with some of the smaller users. Having said that, you know, my company line is we love Kubernetes.
I'm standing here to support that opinion.
Feel free. The counterpoint, though, is we actually have people asking, and to this point about Google being a leader in this community, asking and saying, why isn't Kubernetes being used internally? And the answer is, because it's a much simplified version. So for those people who think that this is being built for only Google's use cases, no. This actually doesn't include many of what the use cases that exist in Borg and Omega.
Before you go, you're happy about that?
So I guess up to now, and both Kubernetes and some related communities have, broadly speaking, been the same people. So the Docker community, the Kubernetes community, the container community, the Koros community, it's basically an amorphous bunch of the same people. As the company's priorities change, as the technology diverges, as people start fighting in public rather than in private, how do you think that will affect the community or communities that might evolve?
Are you referring to libnetwork?
So no one specific thing, and you've got a lot of experience with the network, but I think across the board there are like lots of...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I asked this exact question at the panel last night and got told off by Alexis for asking it. So it clearly was a good question. Yes, I think it's inevitable there's going to be a schism in this. There is one community, and I think it is going to split into two or more communities between Kubernetes and Docker and potentially Mesos. And I think it's a real shame. And I was hoping it wouldn't happen, but I think it's inevitable now. What do you think, Ilya?
What do I think? I think there's still a good intersection there. Yeah, and I can see that potentially some people are going to use different technologies within the same organization. I think that's where we are heading, essentially.
Nobody else wants to touch this one. Come on, Joe.
Is there something that you think the community can do to actually help heal those rifts and actually prevent that from happening? Like I know I've tried to reach out and sort of bridge that gap lots of times. Doesn't always
Back.
work. But I guess, from your point of view, do you think that there's things that need to be done?
Doesn't the OCI and the initiatives around OCI hopefully going to push that standardization?
I would hope so.
And if that happens, then it really is choose your own topology.
But I mean, OCI is such a small piece of the puzzle. Like Docker are building a whole competing stack to Kubernetes, and it's Swarm Week, by the way. Who didn't know that? Like, did you not know that Swarm is 1,000 times better than Kubernetes in every way? According to the blog post. So I feel like the CNCF is a great step, and this is why I asked the question yesterday. Like, I feel like Docker should be a bigger part of the CNCF, and it's a real shame they're not. And I can't think of anything we can do to change that. I think they need to do so. Is anyone from Docker here? Okay, there's a problem. Like, is anyone from Docker at this conference? Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question. Right, so I don't think it's easy to blame them, but there's history
Okay. We won't coach you too much on that one. Different question here, guys.
Actually, I don't have a question. I have a comment. I think all of this is preposterous. So the reality is this is absolutely insanely stupid that we have so many that we've already created divisions among various technologies. I mean, the reality is there should not be odds between Docker and Kubernetes. Kubernetes is using Docker, for God's sake. So the reality is there's completely different use cases, whether you're Mesos or Docker or Cloud Foundry or whatever the case may be. I tend to have quite a good amount of expertise in Kubernetes, and so it makes sense for me and my team to move forward that path. However, if you have zero knowledge of platform as a service or orchestration of containers, then maybe it makes sense to go with some other direction. So the reality is I don't actually see any of this as a problem. I think the fact that we're perpetuating this as a problem in front of people is really the problem in and of itself.
Are you saying, Mike, that...
Yeah, and I completely agree. It's kind of unbearable for me to keep hearing this question come up because it's just so stupid in my mind that we need to get past it and move on to other more important discussions.
This is the voice of non-commercially motivated users, though. This is we're seeing a whole bunch of commercial parties duke it out around who gets to be kind of king of the hill. We really don't care. It just needs to work.
Right. Any lesson-centered questions?
I had a really easy one. Honestly, really easy. I promise you. I promise.
Does anyone think that we should just put Chris up here?
I can answer my question.
Yes. Get up.
So I was more wanting to tap the mind share here of people who have built good communities. What's good tips for trying to build strong communities inside large enterprises? So we can get a movement going inside a company that then becomes part of a wider community initiative.
Drinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got that one down.
Eating, drinking. Ironically, I'm the last person that should answer this. Here's why I'm the last person to answer this. Google is the largest company I've ever worked for by 3 orders of magnitude. So building communities inside large companies, I'm not the right person to answer. Nope.
I might take
You do?
Yes. I might take a stab at that. One of the things that I do internally at Red Hat, one of the things I do internally, every week I do basically a brown bag briefing on a different topic. And what we've done is invited the entire Openshift community to come and attend, as well as all of the SMEs and the solution architects and everything. So we have this very interesting dialogue going on inside of Red Hat that is now informed by the external people as well. So trying to create those conversations, as Fintan pointed out earlier, that brings together the open source and the external users so that they meet halfway with the internal folks has been really helpful within Red Hat. It's called Openshift Commons. Anyone can join. And it's really been a very almost lucrative in terms of finding more resources to work on the project, because the more you tell people internally what you're needing, then they connect with customers who are using your stuff, and then they can go out and inform folks like Weaveworks is going to give a briefing, and so they might not have ever heard of Weaveworks before, but because it's coming in from outside of the community, from the community inwards, it cross-pollinates everything. And that's, I think, really important, not just building ecosystems of people who are users of the project, but all of the people internally that have to support them.
I'll give a bit of a commentary on that as well. So I tried to do some work in 2 different jobs in terms of building communities internally. There's kind of the biggest thing that I found, which is to go into horrible corporate speak, is finding some form of sponsor that actually gives a shit. And that can be quite hard, but occasionally you find them, and you'll generally find in very large organizations, you'll generally find someone who's come up through a pretty technical area that kind of gets, right, I'd like to be able to play with some new technology, and they can become a sponsor. That one does work. And the other one is basically getting people in a room and talking. And as Sarah alluded to, beer is a great and wonderful way of causing a lot of conversations, well, depending on what you're talking about. We have time for one more question, which I think is now going to go to me because I'm the only person standing up here. But okay. So, one last question, folks.
My name's Eric. Hi, I'm from the New York Times, and we've adopted Kubernetes, and I'm one of those people that web developer turned like infrastructure engineer, and I feel like a lot of, well, like moonlighting infrastructure engineer, but do you see like the greater, more web developer community entering into the Kubernetes community and like container infrastructure world? Because I feel like those kind of tasks, like the same thing that, you know, Kubernetes is doing of just like offering a place to like host web services. Those people are very like familiar with like virtual machines, and like that's not that, it might be just familiarity, but how do you see like the expansion of the community in that direction?
I'm happy to answer.
I actually think over time we're going to see the Kubernetes community actually bifurcate. I think that there's, and if you look at the set of presentations, there's definitely a set of presentations around operating a cluster, bringing the cluster up, making sure that it's operating well, what technologies are running underneath it. And then there's a whole set of presentations around using that cluster and how do you build applications on top of it. The typical user, and this is the experience at Google, generally doesn't care what version of the kernel or what OS is actually running under his container. And that's a really healthy split, and it allows both of those communities to actually move, you know, forward further and faster. And so I don't think we're there yet because I think the lines are so blurry and people are actually playing both sides of that. But I think a healthy thing is to actually see more specialization in terms of who takes which role. And that answer is off the record, by the way. So, you know, because you're in the New York Times.
I don't think there's anyone in the room from Deus, but if there was, they'd probably say they had made that split in their tooling, and there are 2 tools, one of which deal with the end user, and one of which deals with
So I was gonna say I see 3 communities as natural evolutions in these projects. The first is the developer community, which is super engaged, building a thing, which is really where we are now. This is like the 90th percentile of the people that are working, the people that are engaged in this community are. So you have like 3 distributions. So this is the big distribution of developers. Then you have an early adopter user or cluster manager, cluster runner. Use case. So those are the people that are overlapping with the developer community at this point right now. And some of them are like yourself, people who come from the furthest group, which is the consumer of these products. And they, you know, you are an early adopter by having jumped into infrastructure and the early side of infrastructure adopters. So I think you see 3 distinct communities with infrastructure software: the people who build it, the people who run it, and then the people who consume it.
So we're seeing at Openshift another a set of tooling, the source to image tooling, and another group of people, the image builders. So the end users who have to build base images or want base images and then have to layer on top of them. And so we're creating SIGs. So the services that are provided on top of Openshift, those folks can build their images correctly, or can be certified, or whatever the word is that Red Hat wants to use today. But there's a whole community of people now who have heard of Docker, have heard of Kubernetes, have heard of Swarm, but they need to be informed about how to create good production-ready enterprise-strength images. And that's been coming just in the past 3 months or so. And I think that's the emerging, where the web app developers are going to start getting more involved.
Do we have one more?
Do we have time? We're out of time. Okay.
Joseph says we're
All
done.
right. Thanks very much, guys.